The house had always felt strange to me, ever since we moved in when I was just a kid. There was something unsettling about it. My parents brushed it off. "It's just an old house," they'd say. But I knew better. It was too big, too quiet, like the kind of place that seemed to breathe on its own. My parents were always busy, and I spent most of my time alone. As I grew older, I began to realize the house wasn't just old. It was hiding something I couldn't explain. That weekend, they left to visit family. My older brother was away at college, and my younger sister had gone to a friend's place. For the first time in a while, I was home alone. At first, I was excited. The house, with its creaking floors and dark corners, was mine now. I wasn't afraid, not in the way my parents thought. But there was always this feeling like something just out of sight was watching. Over the years, I'd gotten used to the odd noises, the taps and rumbles from within the walls, the wind whistling through gaps in the windows. But that weekend, the noises were different. Louder, almost deliberate. Just past midnight, I heard it, a faint scratching sound coming from above. The attic. I'd never paid much attention to it. The entrance was hidden behind a panel in the hallway, with narrow stairs leading up. But that night, something about the sound pulled me toward it. I stood in front of the panel, hand hovering over the latch. The scratching continued. It didn't sound like a mouse or a raccoon. This was different. Intentional. A chill ran down my spine. My cat, Whiskers, who had been lounging in my room, suddenly bolted from the doorway and hissed as he raced down the hall. I stood frozen, my heart pounding. I shouldn't have gone up there, I know that now, but curiosity had its grip on me. The attic door creaked as I slid the panel open. The air was stale and heavy with dust. I grabbed a flashlight from the drawer by the stairs and began to climb. Each step groaned beneath me, echoing through the dark house. When I reached the top, I paused. The scratching had stopped. I swept the flashlight beam across the attic. The room was cluttered with old furniture and boxes, things that had been there long before I was born. But something was different. In the corner, just beneath the rafters, I saw it, a small trapdoor, partially hidden by a stack of old blankets. I didn't remember that trapdoor being there before. The space seemed untouched, yet something felt wrong, like I had stumbled into a secret I was never meant to find. My pulse quickened as I stepped closer, my thoughts spinning. Could someone have been living up here? But that didn't make sense. The attic had always been locked. We never used it. My hand trembled as I reached for the latch. I lifted the door. A rush of cold air hit me, and then I saw it. Blankets, food wrappers, empty cans scattered across the floor. Someone had been living there. But the most chilling thing was the Polaroid. It lay face down in the dust, and when I turned it over, my breath caught in my throat. It was me, sleeping. The photo had been taken from above, likely from the attic ceiling. My blood ran cold. Whoever had been living up here had been watching me for a long time. The attic seemed to spin around me. I dropped the photo, unable to hold it any longer. It landed softly, edges curling on the dusty floor. My mind reeled. Someone had been living in my house, watching me, tracking my every move. This space wasn't just an old and used attic, it was a hideout. I turned sharply, heart pounding, and hurried toward the stairs. I needed to get out. I needed to feel safe. I just needed to get back to my room, anywhere familiar. Then I heard it. A faint sound behind me. Breathing. I froze. My heart thudded so loudly, I thought it might give me away. Slowly, I swept the flashlight across the attic. Shadows stretched and shrank under its beam, but there was nothing. Just darkness. Just silence, except for that steady, almost human breathing. I bolted down the stairs, my hand gripping the railings so tightly it hurt. I had to call someone. The police. Anyone. But when I reached the bottom, panic hit me again. My phone was gone. I checked every pocket, every surface. Nothing. Someone had taken it. Whoever had been in the attic, they'd been in the house. Near me, maybe right behind me. I rushed to my room, hoping to find it there. The door was slightly ajar. I knew I'd locked it. My fingers shook as I pushed it open, the hinges groaning loudly. Inside, everything looked normal, except for one thing. The closet door was open, just a crack. And from inside, I heard it, breathing. Slow, steady, not mine. I stopped cold. My whole body went numb. The air felt thick, heavy. I could barely force my voice out. Hello? I called. No response. Just that breathing. Too slow, too deliberate, too close. I took a step forward, my stomach twisting into knots. Could someone really be in there in my closet? Hiding this whole time? I reached out, my fingertips brushing the cold metal handle. The breathing stopped. Silence. A crushing wave of nausea rolled over me. I couldn't move. My limbs felt frozen, paralyzed by fear. I was about to run when I felt it. Something behind me. Cold. Heavy. Real. A shape moved in the shadows, larger than me. I spun around, heart in my throat, but saw nothing. And yet, I knew I wasn't alone. Something was watching. Then I heard it. A whisper, low and rasping, my name. Ethan. It came from the closet, but it wasn't my voice. It was deeper. Calm. Wrong. Terror surged through me like electricity. I couldn't move. Couldn't think. Then it spoke again. Louder, clearer. I've been watching you for years. The closet door creaked open, just enough for a pair of pale, bony hands to stretch out. The fingers were long and spidery, curling around my arm with a grip like iron. They pulled. I resisted, struggling to wrench myself free, but the strength of those hands was overwhelming. A face emerged from the darkness. Gaunt. Wild. Smeared with dirt. Its grin stretched too wide. Its eyes were wrong. Dark, gleaming, inhuman. I've been here all along. The figure hissed, breath sour against my skin. You never noticed me, but I noticed you. His grip tightened. I fought harder, thrashing, kicking, anything to get away. For a moment, I broke free just enough. I didn't think, I ran. I stumbled toward the bedroom door, lungs burning, feet barely touching the ground. But the handle wouldn't turn. The door was stuck. Behind me, I heard him again. Calm. Patient. Ethan, you can't run. You can't hide. I backed against the door, scanning the room for anything. A weapon, an exit, anything to save me. Nothing. Then a soft thud. I turned back to the closet. Open, empty. But I knew he wasn't gone. He was still here, watching. And then I remembered the attic, the trapdoor, the photograph, where this all began. I wasn't going to let him win. I ran. Up the stairs, taking them two at a time, the house groaning beneath my weight. Each step felt heavier than the last, the weight of fear pressing down on me like lead. But I wasn't going to stop. I had to survive. I didn't know where he was, but I couldn't stop. I wouldn't let him catch me again. The attic was the only place left. The only space I hadn't searched completely, the place where he had been living. If I could make it back there, maybe I could trap him. Maybe I could end this. I took the stairs two at a time, the wood groaning beneath me. I didn't care about the noise now. I just needed to move. I reached the attic door and threw it open with more force than I intended. The hallway light spilled in, casting long, eerie shadows across forgotten furniture and old boxes. It looked empty, harmless. But I knew better now. I scanned the floor, the walls, every shadow and crevice. And that's when I saw it, a second trapdoor I'd missed earlier. Tucked away beneath an old wardrobe, half covered in dust. My hand shook as I opened it. The dark space below yawned open, tight, claustrophobic. But I didn't hesitate. I climbed in, legs trembling, my breath shallow. Then I heard it. A shuffle in the dark. Not below me. Behind me. Ethan, the whisper came again. So close I felt it against my neck. It crawled across my skin like a cold wind. I'm here. The voice echoed in the crawlspace, pressing in from all sides. My breath caught. He was supposed to be downstairs. Somewhere else. Anywhere else. But the voice came from the shadows, right next to me. I pressed myself deeper into the tunnel. The walls were tight. I could barely turn. The floor above creaked under a weight I couldn't see. Another whisper. Another shuffling sound. I turned, slowly, my heart thudding in my ears. There he was. His pale face emerged from the blackness. Eyes bloodshot and bulging. A grin stretched unnaturally wide across his grime-covered face. His clothes were ripped and damp, clinging to his bony frame. He didn't move. Just watched. "You're too late," he rasped. "I've already been inside your head." My stomach twisted. The noises. The missing things. The constant feeling of being watched. It had always been him. A game. A twisted, silent game. He stepped closer. I couldn't move. I was trapped. The crawl space too tight. My body frozen between terror and instinct. My hands scrambled over the wooden floor, searching for anything to protect myself. Nothing. Then a thought. The hidden door. The one I saw before. I didn't know where it led, but it was a way out. I shifted toward it, but his hand lashed out, fingers wrapping around my wrist like steel cables. His nails dug deep into my skin. "You can't leave," he hissed. "You'll never leave." I screamed and pulled with everything I had. My muscles burned. My breath came in ragged gasps. Then, finally, I broke free. My wrists scraped against his nails, blood smearing as I slipped loose. I didn't look back. I dove into the trapdoor, tumbling hard onto the floor below. The impact knocked the wind from me, but I didn't stop. I scrambled to my feet, lungs heaving, and bolted for the far end of the crawl space. His voice followed me. "You think you can escape? You think this ends here?" But I didn't look back. I couldn't. The crawl space tightened, the air growing stale. The wooden beams dug into my shoulders as I crawled forward, faster and faster, desperate to outrun the nightmare behind me. Bruises bloomed on my arms. My knees burned. My whole body ached. But I kept going. I had to, because somewhere up ahead, in the dark, was the exit. Waving my arms like a madman, stumbling into the road with tears streaking my dust-caked face. The headlights grew brighter. Too bright, and for one brief, terrifying moment, I thought the car wouldn't stop. But with a screech of tires and a cloud of gravel, it came to a halt just feet away from me. The driver's door swung open. A man stepped out, flashlight in hand, voice sharp with concern. "Are you okay? What the hell happened?" I couldn't speak, just pointed, trembling, toward the trees. "Someone," he was in my house. The man looked past me into the darkness, frowning, then back at me. "Get in. Now." I didn't hesitate. I threw open the passenger door and climbed in, my body still shaking. As we pulled away, I turned to look back. The house stood there in the distance, quiet and unmoving, but I felt it watching me, like the walls themselves were alive. The attic window was dark, empty, but I knew he was still there. "Alan." His voice still rang in my ears. "I'm not done with you, Ethan." Frantically, the car screeched to a halt beside me, the door flying open. A familiar face looked out. Officer Harris, the local sheriff. "Get in," he shouted. I didn't hesitate. I jumped into the car, slamming the door behind me, my breath coming in ragged gasps as we sped away. I glanced back at the house, watching as the shadows of the trees seemed to swallow it whole. "We've got you," Officer Harris said, his voice calm and reassuring. "You're safe now." But as I stared out the window into the dark night, Alan's voice echoed in my mind, cold and cruel. "I'm not done with you, Ethan. The house would always be with me. And so would Alan." One time, my parents had left for work, my sisters were off at school, and I, 20 female, was alone at home. Our neighborhood is fairly secluded, situated at the top of a large hill, so visitors are extremely rare. I was lounging on the couch watching TV when the doorbell rang. I never answer the door, especially since no one ever drops by unannounced, and my family all have their own keys. So I ignored it. The bell rang again, then a third time. Now annoyed, I tiptoed over to the front entrance. Our front door is a large, heavy wooden one, surrounded by a wall. There's no peephole, and no way to see outside unless you go to the piano room and peek through the window. Likewise, from outside, no one can tell if anyone's home, unless we're being noisy. So I stood silently behind the door, waiting for the person to leave. I mean, if no one answers after the third ring, you'd leave, right? Suddenly, there was a heavy bang on the door. I jumped. Then came a deep voice from the other side. "I know you're in there." My heart leapt into my throat. How did he know? I stood frozen in place. After a long, tense silence, I heard muffled voices and then footsteps retreating. Still, I didn't dare open the door. What if they were pretending to leave? I called my parents. No one was meant to visit. I was shaken by the strange encounter, but eventually, I returned to the TV and tried to put it out of my mind. 2 hours later, the doorbell rang again. A fresh wave of anxiety washed over me. I muted the TV and got up slowly, creeping over to the piano room window. Carefully, I knelt and raised my head just enough to peek out. Standing at the door was a woman dressed entirely in black high heels, a plain black dress that fell to mid-calf, and a wide-brimmed black hat that obscured her face. It was summer, hot and humid, so her outfit alone was odd. She had long, dark brown hair, but the brim of her hat shadowed her face. The only thing I could clearly see were her lips, bright red and pulled into an eerily wide smile. Beside her stood a tall, muscular man in a dark suit. I don't recall many of his features, only that he was a serious-looking Caucasian man, standing perfectly still. What disturbed me most wasn't the man, though. It was the woman. Her unnatural stillness, the unsettling smile, and the way she simply stood there, silently waiting at our unopened front door. After what felt like a solid minute, she took a single step back. Then, without a word, she turned and began walking down the driveway. The man followed. To this day, I don't know who they were, why they came, or if they were the same ones who had knocked earlier. But I'll never forget the deep voice at the door whispering, "I know you're in there," or the image of that smiling woman in black. He had a very serious expression, but what disturbed me most wasn't the intimidating man, it was the woman. She stood completely still at the front door, not moving a muscle, smiling as if someone had opened it, even though no one had. The smile wasn't warm. It was unsettling, too wide, too still. For what felt like an entire minute, she stood there silently, that eerie smile frozen on her face. Then, without saying a word, she took a single step back and began to walk down the driveway. The man followed closely behind her. To this day, I still don't know who she was, why they came to our house, or whether they were the same people who had knocked earlier. But I'll never forget the voice that called through the door, "I know you're in there," and that haunting image of the woman in black. I'm 29 now, female, and while I'm pretty well traveled and have been around a bit, I'll admit, I still make rookie mistakes. It's my fault, and I make no excuses. I try to stay alert and cautious, but I'm definitely capable of letting my guard down. After being in the US for about 2 months, I got bored one evening just sitting around in my unit watching 90 Day Fiancé. So I decided to jump back into online dating. I created a few profiles again, not really with a goal in mind, just to see where things might go. Mostly, I just wanted someone to hang out with. Eventually, I matched with this one guy who shared a lot of my interests. We chatted on the app for a while, and after some time, I felt comfortable enough to give him my number. We kept talking for a couple more weeks, and eventually agreed to meet up. We met at a pub and had a couple of drinks. I'll admit, at first, I didn't even recognize him. He didn't look quite like his pictures. Not bad, just different. It was obvious the photos he used were older and probably edited a bit to make him look more appealing. I'm not trying to sound shallow. He was still cute, just not what I had expected. But to be fair, we're kind of at a point in social media culture where it's almost expected that what you see online won't exactly match real life. And honestly, that's okay. We did get along. We had good conversation and talked about all the usual first date stuff. As the night went on, we got into more personal topics. I told him about my life back home, my work, and how life in the States felt different. At one point, we were talking and holding hands, and I felt comfortable enough to let him kiss me. As we were leaving, he asked if I wanted to go back to his place for a cup of coffee. I told him I knew what that really meant and wasn't interested in doing anything like that on a first date. He reassured me, saying it would only be one cup and promised to give me a ride home afterward, so I wouldn't have to call an Uber. I accepted his offer, and we walked to his apartment a few blocks away. As we made our way up the stairs, he started making some odd comments. He said I wasn't like most girls because I'd accepted his invitation and then hinted that I could be a psychopath. He even motioned to my dress and asked about my breast size. I quickly reminded him that I wasn't interested in taking things further that night. Once we got to his apartment, he excused himself to the bathroom and left me sitting on his bed. It was a studio, and he didn't have a couch. While I waited for him, I looked around and noticed a few unsettling things in the corner near his bed. 2 masks, one a cartoonish goat mask, the other either a cat or tiger mask. Even more alarming, I spotted a Bowie knife and a small woodcutter's axe not far from the masks. My eyes kept wandering. On his dresser, there was a black jumper draped over it, and on his bedside table, I saw a pair of latex gloves. At that moment, I realized I wasn't in a situation I wanted to be in. I calmly got up, left the apartment, and quickly made my way down the stairs and out onto the street. I managed to catch a lift away from his building. Now, I might have hurt his feelings, but at that point I didn't care. He might not have had any malicious intent, but given the combination of odd items and the strange shift in his behavior, I wasn't willing to risk staying there to find out. I don't feel guilty for leaving him, though I do feel bad for how I left it with him. But I'll take an awkward exit over the potential danger. Since then, I've noticed that either he blocked me on Tinder or deleted the app altogether. This happened about 6 years ago, in 2016. I was 18 at the time, having just moved back to Portland, Oregon for college as an escape from the nightmare that had been my life in San Diego, California. I grew up with a single mom, so we moved around a lot, and I'd lived in Vancouver, Washington, and the greater Portland area for a few years before moving to San Diego. When I graduated, I needed an escape. Going to college out of state was the only option, and I applied to Portland State University just 2 weeks before the submission deadline. Of course, I got in. I arrived in Portland about 6 weeks before school started, since I had to attend some academic programs before classes began. So there I was, 18 years old, returning nostalgically to what I considered home, living in the Broadway freshman student housing. I embraced my newfound freedom by taking late-night walks around the park blocks, heading to places like Rocket Fizz or Voodoo Donuts, just about anywhere. By this point, I was already into true crime podcasts, having listened to them since elementary school, thanks to my mom, a former sheriff who used to tell me jail stories for bedtime. I should have known better than to do what I did. I became known among my friends for my unconventional style, even in Portland's autumn weather. I'd wear an oversized XXL shirt, no pants, sneakers, and carry a clear, transparent bag where you could clearly see my wallet. I didn't carry any weapons, even during my late-night solo walks. This story is about one of those walks. One of my favorite places to walk was a parking garage near SW 6th and Jefferson in downtown. I'd spend hours chain-smoking late into the night with no real worries. But one night, around 1 o'clock or 2 a.m., I was heading back to my dorm, slightly tipsy and high, with that nauseous feeling that came from smoking menthol cigarettes for hours. I had passed up a party at University Point that day, so all of my friends were probably drunk and hanging out somewhere nearby. It was a Saturday night, but it felt eerily quiet. No cars or people in sight as I walked down SW 6th. Both of my headphones were in, and I was focusing on shaking off the cold and heading home. Then, suddenly, a car sped up beside me. 2 men jumped out of the car, one on each side of me. I immediately paused my music and I tried my best not to show how freaked out I was, even though I was visibly intoxicated and probably smelled as faded as I felt. Let me also mention, at this point in my life, I had shaved my head nearly bald, weighed about 135 pounds, and wore large shirts. I might as well have been a pantsless guy for all they knew. "Hey, how are you? Where you headed? You seem a bit drunk," the guy on the left said. I shot him daggers with my eyes, trying to hold it together and assure myself that I could still walk straight. "I'm just trying to make it home tonight," I replied. The guy on the right said, "We can help, or we can take you to our home." Where's home for you? I ignored him and kept walking at my pace. I didn't believe in God back then, but I was silently praying in my head, hoping I'd make it home. I promised whoever was listening that I wouldn't be so stupid again, out late and under the influence. The two men exchanged a look and started walking slower, following behind me. I calculated how far I was from my dorm, where my key card was, and how fast I could run to the building without being caught by them or anyone else in the car. But before I could figure out my options, the car screeched back, and they hopped in, speeding off. I counted my lucky stars and kept running, making a beeline for Max, the liquor store where me and my friends used to chain smoke. I called campus security and relayed everything to them. To my horror, they told me I was the 13th person to call in with such a report that week. I went back to my dorm, heart racing, waiting for my friends to show up so I could tell them what had just happened. But, of course, the story didn't end there. Fast forward to July 2017. I had dropped out of college after my first semester, gone back to San Diego for a few months, and then officially moved me and my family back up to Portland. We were getting settled into our cozy apartment, watching the news when it hit me like a ton of bricks. My stomach dropped, and I felt like I was going to vomit. On the news, they reported a human trafficking ring had been busted in the next city over. They showed the faces of the arrested individuals, and most of them were women. A handful of men were shown on the news, but I recognized two faces, the same men from that night. Yes, I had been tipsy and high, but I knew those faces without a doubt. I called the Portland Police Department, PPD, and provided them with the details, and they confirmed that the call-ins around the same time as mine matched how some members of the trafficking ring operated. Why they didn't abduct me, I'll never know, but all I can say is that I'm grateful. To the two traffickers who preyed on me but let me go, let's not meet again. It wasn't the first time I had returned to this old house, though each time it felt like stepping into a place I no longer recognized. My grandmother, Evelyn, had lived here as long as I could remember. The house sat in a quiet corner of the countryside, nestled against a forest that always seemed to whisper with the wind. With my parents away on vacation for a week, they asked me to care for Evelyn while they were gone. It wasn't really a favor. I didn't have a job, just school. A few days wouldn't hurt. Evelyn hadn't spoken for years. Her stroke had left her paralyzed, her mind sharp but trapped in a body that refused to obey. I knew her routines, how to help her get dressed, feed her, and move her from place to place. It was hard to imagine her any differently than the frail, silent woman who sat in her chair by the window, her eyes dimmed but full of memories. The house had always felt dark, both figuratively and literally. It creaked and groaned in ways that made it feel alive, as if it was always watching me. But it wasn't just the old wood and rusted pipes. There were stories. Stories my parents had dismissed as old family rumors, but I had heard them all the same. They said that in the 1940s, the house had been the site of a failed exorcism. The boy they tried to save had never left the house. Some said he disappeared, but I had always wondered if he was still there. I didn't believe in ghosts, not like that, but even as I went about my daily tasks, the house felt heavier. The halls were too silent, too still, and the air smelled of something ancient. When I arrived that night, the power flickered out for a moment. I brushed it off, blaming it on the storm. But when the lights flickered again, it felt like something more, something that had been waiting. My first night in the house was uneventful. I got Evelyn settled in her room and made sure she had everything she needed. When I went to bed, I told myself I was being silly. The house was just old, and there was nothing more to it than that. But then the lights flickered again. This time, at exactly 3:13 a.m., the same time the exorcism had taken place all those years ago. My heart started pounding as I sat up in bed, but I tried to ignore it. Old houses had quirks, right? Old houses always had their share of creaks and groans, I told myself. That's all it was, until something happened that I didn't expect. Evelyn, who hadn't spoken in years, whispered something. It was a croaky, raspy sound, like a voice buried deep within the depths of time.
"He's here," she said.
I froze. My grandmother's voice hadn't sounded like that in so long. I jumped out of bed, my mind racing. What did she mean?
Who was she talking about?
But when I turned to look at her, her eyes were closed again, her hands resting motionless on the armrests of her wheelchair, just as they always were. It wasn't possible. She hadn't spoken in years. Yet, I could still hear the echo of her words ringing in my head. The silence that followed was deafening. It was too much to ignore, but I tried. I told myself it was just a dream, just a bad night. I had to keep going.
Right?
But as I sat back down, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. The next day, I tried to brush off what had happened the night before. After all, Evelyn had been through so much. Maybe it was a side effect of her condition. But the strange occurrences didn't stop. I went through my usual routine, helping Evelyn with her breakfast, making sure her medication was in order, and doing my best to keep her comfortable. But no matter how hard I tried to focus, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something wasn't quite right. Around noon, I noticed something odd in the kitchen. The fridge, which I had stocked the night before, was slightly open. Just a crack, nothing major, but when I went to close it, I realized something was missing. A few items had vanished, nothing that couldn't be explained away by a mistake, maybe even an absent-minded slip. But still, I couldn't shake the chill that ran down my spine. I didn't want to think about it, but it was getting harder to ignore. Later that evening, as I sat reading in the living room, I heard faint tapping sounds coming from the ceiling. It wasn't the usual creaking of the old house. This was different. 3 quick taps, followed by silence. I froze. My pulse quickened. I looked up, but there was nothing out of the ordinary. I tried to convince myself it was just the house settling. But the feeling of unease lingered. By nightfall, I was jumpier than I cared to admit. I kept hearing things, whispers in the wind, the faint scratching of something behind the walls. The house, it seemed to be alive with its own secrets. But the worst part came when I went to bed. As I pulled the covers up to my chin, I noticed something odd. The bedroom door, which I had locked before going to bed, was now slightly ajar. I got up to check it, but there was nothing. Nothing except an overwhelming sense that I wasn't alone. I quickly shut the door, but the air felt thick, suffocating. I couldn't explain it. My mind kept racing back to the stories I'd heard as a child, the failed exorcism, the boy who disappeared, and the rumors that his spirit never left. I had never believed in ghosts, not really, but now, sitting there in the dark, I wasn't so sure. Later that evening, I sat with Evelyn in her room, trying to keep my thoughts from spiraling. She looked so small in that oversized chair, her frail hands resting gently in her lap. As I adjusted the blanket around her shoulders, I noticed something strange. She was staring at the attic door, her eyes wide with fear. I followed her gaze, my stomach tightening. The attic. I'd always avoided it, not for any specific reason, but because something about it felt wrong. It was just an attic, a dusty, old space filled with forgotten furniture and memories, but there was something about it that unsettled me. Suddenly, Evelyn let out a low moan, her voice trembling. "Don't go up there, Mara," she whispered. My heart skipped a beat. She hadn't spoken in years. And now she was warning me. I stood frozen, staring at the attic door. The air felt colder, heavier. A prickling sensation ran down the back of my neck, as if the attic, just like the rest of the house, was alive, watching, waiting. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that the house was suffocating me. I had always considered myself a logical person, dismissing anything I couldn't explain as mere coincidence or imagination. But Evelyn's words stuck with me. "Don't go up there, Mara." Why had she said that? She barely spoke anymore. When Evelyn spoke, it was usually unintelligible, like a broken record repeating long-forgotten phrases. But tonight, her warning had been so clear, so purposeful. It was almost as though she had something to say, something urgent, but I couldn't understand why. I spent the evening pacing around the house, desperately trying to focus on anything that might distract me from the creeping fear that seemed to be growing in the corners of my mind. But as midnight approached, the atmosphere only became more oppressive. Every creak of the floorboards, every faint whisper in the air made my nerves twitch. I found myself constantly glancing toward the attic door, which now seemed to loom larger than ever. My pulse quickened each time my eyes fell on it. What was up there? What had Evelyn meant? Despite the rising terror inside me, something primal pushed me forward. I grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer and made my way toward the attic stairs. The heavy wooden door seemed to stand in front of me, daring me to open it. I took a deep breath, but the sound of my own heartbeat drowned out the silence of the house. The air felt thick with anticipation, as though the house itself was holding its breath. When I opened the door, the smell hit me first, a musty, stale odor that felt like it had been trapped there for decades. The stairs creaked under my weight, protesting with each step. The beam of my flashlight swept across the small, cluttered space. The attic was just as I remembered it, dim, filled with boxes and old furniture, a place full of forgotten relics. But something was different. The air felt colder here, and as my light flickered over the room, I could have sworn I saw something move, a shadow slipping out of sight behind a stack of old newspapers. I froze. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. My breath quickened, and my pulse hammered in my chest. Was I imagining things? I tried to shake off the fear, telling myself it was just shadows playing tricks on my mind. But then I heard it, a soft scrape, like nails against wood, coming from behind the farthest wall. Without thinking, I moved toward the sound. The closer I got, the stronger the scent of decay became, making my stomach churn. I reached the far wall and shined my flashlight into the corner, where an old chest sat, covered in dust. There was something about it. A feeling in my gut told me that I should not open it. I took a step back, but the scraping sound came again, louder this time, as if whatever was in the attic was trying to get out. That's when I saw it. A small, almost imperceptible trapdoor in the floorboards, one I had never noticed before. My hand shook as I knelt down to examine it. I rushed to clear the dust and debris from the trapdoor. The wood was old and splintered, but there was no mistaking what it was. I had to open it. Taking a deep breath, I pried it open, my fingers trembling as I revealed the hidden space inside. It was small, a nest of dirty blankets and discarded food wrappers. But what caught my eye was something else, a Polaroid picture. I picked it up, my hands shaking as I stared at the image. It was a picture of me, taken while I was asleep. The clarity of the photo made my skin crawl. I couldn't breathe, my mind racing with panic settling in my chest like a heavy stone. Someone had been in my house. Someone had been watching me, and they had been here for a long time. I backed away from the trapdoor, still clutching the Polaroid in my hand, my heart pounding in my ears. How had I never noticed this before? Why hadn't I been more careful? My thoughts collided in a frenzied swirl of confusion and terror. This photo, it was proof. Proof that someone had been here, someone who had been watching me. But who? And for how long? My gaze shifted to Evelyn, sitting motionless in her chair, her eyes dull and lifeless. A sudden, irrational wave of dread washed over me. For a brief moment, I couldn't shake the feeling that she knew something she wasn't telling me, something she had been complicit in. I shook my head, trying to push the thought away. My grandmother had been paralyzed for years. She couldn't have done anything. But the thought lingered, gnawing at me like an insistent whisper. I slumped back against the wall, the weight of everything sinking in. I couldn't stay here alone anymore. I had to get out. I couldn't be in this house, not with whatever was lurking in the attic. But when I stood up, I felt the air shift. A sudden chill swept through the room, and for the briefest moment, I thought I saw something move in the corner of my eye. My heart leaped, and I spun around, pulse racing, but there was nothing there, just Evelyn, her vacant stare fixed on nothing in particular. A knot tightened in my stomach as I turned back to the trapdoor. I had to know what was going on. I had to know what I was dealing with. It wasn't safe to leave, not with something inside this house. I grabbed my laptop and set it up in the living room, positioning the camera to face the hallway. If I could catch something on tape, maybe I would have evidence of whatever was happening. Maybe I could prove to myself that I wasn't losing my mind. Exhausted but determined, I settled into watch. Hours passed, the house settling into an eerie silence. The shadows in the corners seemed to deepen, and the oppressive weight in the air grew heavier. The clock on the wall ticked louder than ever. Then, at 3:13 a.m., something shifted. I wasn't sure if it was the time or something else that made my blood run cold, but I felt it. Something was about to happen. My eyes never left the video feed on the screen. The living room was empty, bathed in the dim light from the street lamp outside. The minutes dragged on, each second a tight knot in my stomach. And then, at exactly 3:13, I saw it. A shadow. A dark, contorted figure crawling out from behind the corner, its movements unnatural and slow. It was crawling toward the camera. Evelyn's wheelchair moved jerkily, unnaturally, creeping toward me. The black form of her figure blended with the darkness, sending a wave of dread through me. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. It loomed over me, its twisted shape standing tall, and in the heavy silence of the night, it whispered. The words were garbled, foreign, and unintelligible, but the malice behind them was clear. It leaned closer, its face mere inches from mine. Its hollow, dark eyes locked onto me, and then, as it turned its head toward the camera, it grinned. I shot awake, gasping for breath. The video feed was still playing on my laptop, but the room around me felt suffocating. My eyes flicked to the screen, and I saw the remnants of the shadow, lingering in the corner of the frame as though it had never left. I took a shaky breath, hands trembling as I fumbled to pause the video. The image froze, and I stared at the grin on the thing's face, so wide, so unnatural. It made my stomach churn. This wasn't a trick of the light. This wasn't a nightmare. It was real. That thing was here, and it had been waiting for me. I turned slowly to look at Evelyn, still sitting in her chair, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She had been like that all day. The whisper she had uttered earlier, "He's here," now echoed in my mind, taking on a chilling new meaning. I had thought it was just a coincidence, but now I knew. It wasn't just the house that was haunted. It was her. The demon hadn't been exorcised. It had simply hidden, using Evelyn as its vessel. And now it was transferring to me. A cold wave of realization hit me like a punch. It had never left. The exorcism hadn't failed. It had only gone dormant. Evelyn had been its host all along, and now it wanted to take me. My throat tightened with panic as I backed away from her, my legs shaking. This wasn't happening. It couldn't be. But every instinct screamed at me to run, to escape the house, to get away from her, from whatever was lurking inside. The door slammed shut with a deafening bang, trapping me in the room. I could hear it again, the faint sound of breathing, deep and ragged, the same as the noise that had come from the darkened living room. It was coming from behind me, from Evelyn. My heart hammered in my chest as I spun around. That's when I saw it. Her body jerked violently, her back arching as if controlled by some unseen force. Her eyes were wide, unblinking, and her mouth stretched open in a silent scream. The room grew colder, the air thickening as though the walls were closing in on me. I was frozen, paralyzed by fear, but I knew I couldn't just stand there. I couldn't let it take me. Frantic, I turned, desperate to find a way out. I searched frantically, my eyes landing on the laptop. The exorcism prayer I had found online, it was my only hope. Desperate, I grabbed the screen and began to recite the words, my voice trembling with fear. "Leave me. Leave this house," I whispered. But it wasn't enough. The demon's presence thickened around me, suffocating, pressing in on all sides. My breath came in ragged gasps, yet I kept speaking the prayer, though the words seemed to have no effect. The air was dense with malevolence, and I could feel the demon's gaze upon me, watching, waiting, ready for me to break. "Stay," a voice rasped, deep and hoarse, echoing in my mind. "I've waited so long for you." I snapped my head toward Evelyn. Her body was convulsing violently. Her hands gripped the arms of her wheelchair as if trying to escape, but there was no escape. Her mouth opened wide, stretched into an unnatural grin, and her eyes, those hollow, soulless eyes, locked onto me, unblinking. I could see the demon's influence tightening its grip around her, and in that moment, I knew I was trapped. Panic surged through me. There was no way out. The doors were locked, the windows sealed. The room was suffocating with the heat, but it wasn't from the fire I had planned to start. It was the demon's fury, palpable and suffocating, pressing in from every angle. I glanced at the corner of the room where the shadows had gathered, watching, mocking, taunting me. Then a thought struck me. I couldn't fight this with prayers. I couldn't fight it with words. But I could force it to reveal itself, force it into a physical form. With trembling hands, I grabbed a matchbox from the counter, striking a match. The first flame flickered weakly, but as I watched, it grew larger, devouring everything it touched. The heat was unbearable, but I didn't care. I needed this. I needed the demon to show itself, to stop hiding in the shadows. The fire spread quickly, engulfing the room and Evelyn. No, the thing controlling her screamed. The air twisted as the flames consumed everything in their path. The demon's form began to emerge from the smoke, no longer hidden in the shadows. A grotesque, skeletal figure, its eyes hollow and sunken, its body a twisted mockery of life. It shrieked in agony as the flames wrapped around it, forcing it to reveal itself. And in that moment, I saw the truth. The demon wasn't just after me. It had always been after me. I was its final prey. With a final, desperate cry, the demon collapsed to the ground, writhing in agony as the flames continued to burn it away. And then there was silence. I stumbled backward, gasping for breath, my chest heaving. I looked around the room. The fire raged out of control, but I knew it was almost over. I couldn't stay here. I had to get out. I grabbed Evelyn's wheelchair, pushing it out of the room as quickly as I could. The door opened easily now, the house seeming to surrender as if it knew I had won. I didn't look back. I couldn't. We made it outside. But as I stood there, looking at the burning house, a strange emptiness washed over me. Evelyn's shallow, labored breaths came beside me. Her grip had loosened, and I knew what that meant. Her final breath escaped in a soft sigh. Then she was gone. The fire raged behind me, but I couldn't feel it. I looked up at the distant sky, and for the first time in what felt like forever, the stars seemed brighter than ever. I've always lived in one of the safest neighborhoods, feeling secure in a place where I've spent my whole life. Despite being in a community that's often labeled as dangerous, due to its poverty and predominantly minority residents, it's one that fosters a strong sense of belonging and connection among its people. One night, I was walking home after a quick trip to the deli. It was around 10 or 11 p.m., a regular evening in my city that never sleeps. I had nothing unusual planned, just grabbing snacks. As I entered my apartment building, a man hurried to catch the door before it closed. It wasn't uncommon for people, myself included, to forget their keys or need to buzz in, so I held the door open for him without giving it much thought. I didn't recognize him, and I could tell he was intoxicated. The building has two sides, and I assumed he lived on the other side, since he didn't look familiar. I've lived here my entire life, so I know most of my neighbors. When I entered the lobby, I noticed another boy waiting for the elevator. I didn't recognize him either, though. When the elevator arrived, the boy and I stepped in. But at the last moment, the man grabbed the door to join us just before it closed. That's when I realized he had been lingering off to the side of the lobby, seemingly waiting for the elevator too. A wave of unease hit me. His sudden entry made me nervous, especially since he hovered over the button I pressed, as if he was going to select the same floor until he saw I already had. My stomach dropped. I knew for sure that he didn't live on my floor. Thankfully, the other boy was going to a higher floor than mine, so when we reached my stop, I quickly stepped out. But the man didn't follow. Instead, he held the elevator door open, waiting for me to exit after him. I froze, staring at him, my instincts screaming to stay in the elevator. When he realized I wasn't moving, he let the door close and walked away, heading straight for the stairs. I stood there for a moment, unsure whether to say something to the boy in the elevator. I was worried I'd seem paranoid for not leaving, but something just didn't sit right. The boy quietly stepped off at his floor, and I took the elevator back down to mine. Once inside my apartment, I locked all the doors behind me. What still frightens me is that my parents were out of the country at the time. If that man had forced his way into my apartment, I would have been alone. I still don't know if my instincts were right or if I imagined the whole thing, but I've never experienced that kind of gut-wrenching unease before. Looking back, I can't help but wonder if that boy was a guardian angel, keeping watch when I needed it the most.